Good morning, everyone. Now we're going to review the lesson number two, which corresponds to the examination of the operating rules of the harmonized systems, the general rules of interpretation. So we're going to review them one by one, but let's do first an introductory review to approach them in a systemic way. Well, now in our second session, we're going to review from the lesson three, which correspond to the examination of the operating rules of the harmonized system, the general rule of interpretation. So we are going to review them one by one. But let's do first an introductory review to approach them in a systemic way. The content of this first lesson is to know why we need rules when we are applying the harmonized systems. What are these rules in general terms, and how do these rules work? From rule 1 to rule 6, we have already mentioned that there are 6 general rules of interpretation. We're going to review all the rules first in general terms and then in detail one by one. As we already say in the introductory lesson, all systems have operating rules. And since we already know what that the harmonized system is actually a system, it also has operating rules that allow its structures, for example, the code and their description plus the legal notes, to work correctly and allow the purpose, the objective of the system to be achieved, which is to find the code that corresponds to your merchandise. The general rules of interpretation are written in the text of the international harmonized system, and as well, national legislation must integrally incorporate the international harmonized system. Therefore, these rules are also part of all national versions of the harmonized system in all countries. But it should also be remembered that countries have the faculty to add some elements that are considered necessary to their particular country, considering that each country has special and particular characteristics. We already saw this regarding the structure when countries could add or addition more specification levels in the coding structure of the harmonized system, adding more digits in the case of Malawi, adding 2 digits more than those contained in the international system. That is adding the digit 6 of the international system to more 2 more digits to reach finally 8 digits. But well, in the case of the rules, it is also possible to add some national rules. However, this can never be against the 6 general rules contained in the international harmonized system. The text of the harmonized system, therefore, incorporates a series of preliminary provisions codifying the principle of which the system is based and laying down general rules to ensure uniform legal interpretation. These are 6 of these rules, known as the general rule of interpretation, which have to be applied in a hierarchical fashion. This means rule 1 take precedence over rule 2 and rule 2 over rule 3, etc. The rules operate in very general terms in this way. First, we must find the correct heading for our merchandise. Remember that the heading is the 4 digits code. So we will apply rule 1 if we are able to do it. We must continue applying the following rules from 2 to 5 depending on the type of complication we had, and that did not allow us to easily apply rule 1, such as if it is an incomplete merchandise or a set of merchandise, or if it is a merchandise that apparently has more than one option of headings where to classify it, or if it is a packaging, etc. Once resolved, which is corresponding heading for our merchandise, we must find then the 6-digit subheading. Applying rule 1 again, this time to find the subheading. If the merchandise is a product without major complications, as is the case of the most merchandise, we will apply rule 1 to find our heading and then rule 6 to find the subheading, which is in practice is the same rule 1 process but applying it to subheadings. So it will be in many of the cases that we will find in reality, we will apply only what indicates rule 1 to find the correct code for our goods. The other rules will apply when the rule 1, that they call it the golden rule, cannot be used. That is in case where we find, for example, part of product, unfinished product containing several products or set of products, with product that apparently can be classified more than one heading or subheading, or with product that have packaging as we already say. But most of the time you will apply this is indicated in rule 1 and 6, which, as I say, the same rule 1 but applied to the subheadings. So and this will be enough to find the heading first and then the subheading of our merchandise. Good. But what is this what this famous rule 1 actually say? Let's see what says what our golden rule. Rule 1 say the table of contents, alphabetical index, and title of session, chapters, and subchapters are provided for ease of reference only. For legal purposes, classification shall be determined according to the terms of the headings or on any relative section of chapter notes, and provide such heading or note do not otherwise require according to the following provisions. As you saw, rule number 1 mentioned two important things. First, mentioned that for legal purposes, classification is determined by the term of the heading and of the section or chapter notes, and that the table of contents, alphabetical index, and title, section, chapter, or subchapters are provided for ease of reference only, and say that are not legal and cannot be given as a legal argument or fundament in court as a basis for the classification of merchandise. And second, it say there are, however, cases where the text of the heading and legal notes cannot of themselves determine the appropriate heading with certainty. Then classification is then affected by the application of the other interpretative rules. Good, but the main part of the rule 1 provide that the classification must be carried out according to the text of the headings and the section notes of the chapter. Therefore, what determines with priority the classification in the harmonized system is the text of the headings of 4 digits, as well as the legal notes of section and chapters. Both texts, the text of the headings and the notes, have a strictly identical value from the legal point of view. Therefore, the index, the content table, and the title of the sections, as you can see there on the screen, only have an indicative value. They only serve as orientation. The text of these titles have no legal force or legal consequence for the classification of the merchandise. Remember, they can be only used as reference, orientation. For example, in section 15, the title say common metal, an article of these metals. However, there are numerous manufactured of base metal classified in other sections. Or in the chapter 1 indicate in its title living animals. However, some unlive animals are excluded from this chapter, such as fish or live crustaceans that correspond to chapter 03, or the microorganisms of the chapter 30. For this very reason, titles can be misleading in your search for the proper classification. And in one of the reason that rule number 1 states that they are in the harmonized systems only for reference for orientation uh, when you are in the process of classifying emission. So remember, GRI 1 or General Rule of Interpretation 1 states that the titles of section, chapters, and subchapters are offered for is the reference only. What is really worth for the classification of your merchandise are the text of the heading, also subheadings, and the legal note of the section and chapters. However, it may happen that the text of heading and section notes or chapters sometimes are not enough to find the correct classification in a specific heading of subheading. We may find ourselves in case where it appears a priori several different items could be the one that correspond to our merchandise. In this case, the other general rules must be used. Rule 1, 3, rule 2, 3, or 4, in that order. But well, in summary, rule 1 tells us first that for legal purposes classification shall be determined by the term of the heading and the section of chapter notes. Second, that the table of content, alphabetical index, title, section, chapter, and subchapter are provided for is the reference only. And finally, that there are, however, cases where the text of the heading and legal note cannot of themselves determine the appropriate heading with certainty. So, classification is then affected by the application of the next interpretative rules 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then, as a piece of advice, when you are classifying and applying rule number 1, our golden rule, 2 actions are compulsory. First, please understand the heading. Make sure that you read the entire heading. At times, the working or punctuation or vastness of the heading language make it difficult to understand. Be sure to read it all the way through. And the second advice, please read all legal notes. Remember, the classification is determined both by the text of the heading and by the text of the legal notes of section or chapter for both. They have the same importance. So also make sure to read all the notes corresponding to the section or chapter that you are considering when classifying a merchandise. Well, now let's see some examples of the application of rule number 1. Here we have an invoice, a commercial invoice that say all frozen chickens. We will use the text of the heading to find the heading that corresponds to the whole frozen chicken. But let's remember that we can use, although it is only for reference, the text of the heading, the sections or chapters or the index. So for reference, section 1, only for reference, remember, section 1 mentioned animal products. This places us in chapter 1 to 5, as you see on the screen top right. If we go to the mentioned chapters, chapter 2 mentioned in its text, remember this text, the name of the chapter, is also only a reference. It is only helping us to explore possibilities of classification decision. But here the text. The name of the chapter 2 says meat and edible meat offal. The other chapter refers to live animals, fish, dairy product, or others. It seemed that we should go to the chapter 2 in this case. Let's see what chapter 2 say. Uh, Chapter 2 has a lot of headings. Now we have to look very carefully and in detail at the text of the headings. Remember that until now we have only used the section text and the name of text of the chapters as reference. But now we are in the text of the heading. Now it is different. It is these texts that have legal force to classify. These texts are the ones that really determine where the goods are classified. So we have to be very precise reading them. In this example, we have a lot of headings from 01 to 0201 to 0208. But if you read them, you can find the heading 0207 as marked there with a red circle that is specifically mentioned in its text meat of poultry of heading 0105. All other refers to let's say goats or swine, bovine animals, etc. So let's analyze this particular heading 0207 a bit closer. This heading mentioned meat of poultry of heading 0105. If we go to the heading 0105, which is on top to the right, indicate the heading refer to species of Gallus domesticus. You already know what is a Gallus domesticus from our first session. So they are chickens. So this heading 0207 indicate in its text specifically meat of Gallus domesticus, chicken meat, fresh, chilled, or frozen. So this heading mentioned it in its text chicken meats and include the characteristic frozen. So here we can see how it is possible to find a specific heading by reading the text of the sections and as a reference and reading the text of the heading very carefully to find the correct classification of the merchandise. In this example, we have found that the merchandise indicate on the invoice frozen chickens correspond to the heading 0207. But let's look at another example, because actually, as you already know, we shouldn't only pay attention to the text of the headings. You know that. Now we have a guitar, and our commercial invoice is about a guitar, a classical Spanish guitar. When we study a bit about it, we know that it is a guitar made of wood. So when we look for a reference in this section, we can find section number 9 in Roman numerals down there, which indicate that the articles of wood are classified in this section in some chapter from 44 to 46. Remember, when we read the text of the section or the index or the text of the chapters, we are doing it only as help, as a reference. So let's take a closer look at the mentioned chapters. Here we see the chapter 44 and the section 9, woods and articles of woods. The 45 for corn and articles of corn, and 46 manufacturers of straw and other plating materials. So obviously, according to the reference that they help, that the text of the chapter give us, we opted for chapter 44, wood and articles of wood. Once here inside chapter 44, the problem gets more complex or complicated. There are many headings with different items made of wood, and it is the text of the heading that really matters when we are classifying a merchandise. But now we remember that it is not only the text of the heading that matters. The section and chapter note also matters. So let's see what they say. Well, we are now in the chapter notes. They are not section notes, but there is a quite extensive chapter notes. This chapter note indicates that this chapter do not cover, it says specifically there, this chapter do not cover, it is a chapter note of the exclusive time, as we already indicated in the past lesson. And if we read all of them carefully, we find one, the letter M, that indicate that this chapter do not include goods of section 18, for example, clocks, cases, and musical instruments. Okay, so this chapter number 44 does not include our musical instrument, the Spanish wooden guitar, and therefore we must go back and look for some other reference that will help us find the correct code. We review again as a reference what the text of the section indicates, and we now find section 18 that mentioned the musical instrument. This section includes chapter 90 to 92. So we will see which one has a title that can help, can guide us in this research, in this search for the correct heading. Here are the chapter of section 18. This is chapter 90, mentions optical instruments, and chapter 92, it say mention specifically musical instrument, parts, and accessory of such articles. It seems that now we are doing better. So let's see what heading this chapter 92 includes. Here you can see at least 5 headings, although 2 of them are eliminated. So in the heading 9201, the text indicate pianos, including automatic and other keyboards. The heading 9205, that is in its text, indicate that wind instruments are classified there. The heading 9206, the percussion instruments, and the heading 9202, that in its text mention other string instruments, for example, guitars, violins, and harps. Okay, this text, which is the text that really has legal force to classify, remember the other texts are for reference only, this heading text specifically mentions guitars, that it is a specific heading, as we already mentioned in previous lessons. Therefore, at best, our code is correct, but we cannot ensure this before our second golden rule, when we are applying rule 1 of interpretation. The first is to carefully read the text of the heading, and the second is to carefully review the legal note of the section and chapter that correspond to the heading we have found. We can review the legal notes we can review the legal notes in the presentation. This presentation above, marked with the red box. There are two chapter notes, as you can see there. The first one is exclusive. We carefully review it. Remember, that one was previously another exclusion for chapter 44. Made us start over again. So we review this note number 2 to see if it excludes our merchandise. Okay, after reading all of the letter of the note from A to E, we can see that it does include, this note doesn't exclude our Spanish guitar. Note 2, a heading note, doesn't mention our guitar either. Well, if we also review the section notes, we can see that our merchandise is not affected either. Therefore, we can say that we have found the corresponding heading for our merchandise, a Spanish guitar, which is then classified in position 9202. You have seen now how using the text of the headings and the chapter and section notes as a legal basis of our classification, and the other text only as reference, we have applied rule number 2 to find the correct tariff code. Well, most of the time you will need only rule 1 to find the right heading for your merchandise, but sometimes not. And what do we have to do when this happens? Well, we have to use the next rules. So let's review the second rule. Remember, this rule applies when we cannot apply rule 1, which is when the text of the heading and the legal notes of the section and chapters are not enough to find the correct tariff code. So let's see what rule 2 says. Well, rule 2 has two parts. A part indicates as letter A that refer to when the merchandise with which it was not possible to classify with rule 1 is incomplete or unfinished. The second part identify with the letter B on the screen, which refers to finished or complete but unassembled or disassembled. This first part of letter A extend the scope of any heading which refers to a particular article to cover not only the complete article but also that article incomplete or unfinished, provided that as presented it has the essential character of the complete or finished merchandise. The second part of the letter A of the rule 2 provides that complete or finished article presented unassembled or disassembled, usually for reasons such as the requirement or convenience of packaging, handling, or transport. These have to be classified in the same heading as the assembled articles. The rule 2, letter B, on the other hand, extend the scope of any heading referring to a material or substance or merchandise made therefrom. Under this rule, goods consisting of more than one material or substance must, unless another heading refers to them, in their mixed or composite state, be classified according to the principle of rule 3. Let's look in more detail at letter A of the general rule of interpretation 2. As we say already, rule 2, letter A, has the effect of expanding the scope of the heading beyond the term of the text by allowing the aforementioned articles to be classified in them, whether they are incomplete or unfinished, even if they are presented disassembled or not yet assembled. They represent two different aspects. On the one hand, an incomplete or unfinished article is considered complete. And on the other hand, disassembled or not yet assembled article must be classified as if it were assembled. The principle by which incomplete or unfinished articles are classified with the complete or finished ones, it is a consequence of an essential condition. Such articles, incomplete or unfinished, must present the essential characteristic of complete or finished articles. What determines essential characters of a product varies based on the type of product it is. It is on this is a problem you have to be solved case by case basis. The essential character of the product is determined by the natural of the material or component that make up the product. This also includes its bulk, weight, quality, value, or the use of function of the product. For example, an incomplete article that should be considered as complete or finished are an automobile devoid of its is without its wheels, or a car without an engine, or a bicycle without a seat or tires. Well, unfinished merchandise must also be classified in the heading of the complete articles, but except in the case in which they are especially cited or mentioned in text of headings. For example, the draws for corks with aged corks cannot be classified under heading 4503 with finished stoppers. Seeing these sketches are the subject of a specific heading, the heading 4502. On the other hand, unfinished products are also considered unfinished items even when they are not used, but have approximately the shape of profile of the finished object or products without being able to be used. With some exceptions, without being able to be used for purpose other than the manufacturer of the object or merchandise. For example, raw keys, knives without their serration of the edge, or performs to make bottles. Well, now the second part of the rule 2a, the second part, provide that articles that are presented disassembled or not yet assembled are classified in the same heading of those assembled. The same rule apply to products that are presented disassembled or not yet assembled, as long as these articles, when they are assembled, have the essential characteristic of a complete or finished article or product. The provision take into account that the fact that many goods are sold disassembled or unassembled due to the needs arising for packaging, handling, or transport. For the application of this rule, it is considered disassembled or not disassembled the article whose different element or part are intended to be put together using simple devices such as screws, bolts, nuts, etc., or by welding, as long as they are simple operation of mounting. This usually happen with bulky merchandise, uncomfortably or complicated to handle, or fragile, such as machines, lighting fixtures, prefabricated furniture, etc., which generally are presented disassembled or unassembled. It would not be appropriate for this type of merchandise to be treated differently from the corresponding assembled product simply because it is presented disassembled or unassembled. It will be noted that rule 2a concerns exclusively articles. Consequently, it does not usually apply to product of section from section 1 to section 4 that usually do not found it disassembled.